I'm standing in the middle of my son's marble foyer, champagne glass trembling in my hand, about to destroy every lie they built. The enormous chandelier above cast shadows across faces I once kissed goodnight, faces now frozen in polite smiles, waiting, watching. My hands shake not from age but from the weight of what I'm about to unleash. The truth I've carried like stones in my pockets for months. I'm 72 years old, my silver hair pulled back in the same simple bun I've worn for 40 years. Nothing fancy, nothing remarkable. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, though for decades I was just Mom, Grandma, the woman who showed up with casseroles and disappeared quietly. Every wrinkle on my face tells a story nobody bothered to read. Each line, a chapter of sacrifice they skimmed past on their way to better things. I built my life around making myself smaller so they could be bigger, quieter so they could be heard, invisible so they could shine bright. There was no dramatic moment when they stopped seeing me. No single day when I became a ghost. Just a slow fade into the background noise. Missed calls became the norm. Forgotten birthdays, just another Tuesday. My voice in family discussions. Nothing more than irritating static. I learned to speak in whispers and apologize for taking up space. Learned that my needs were a burdens and my presence merely tolerated barely. Before I tell you how I ended up here, holding evidence of their betrayal, I need to know who's listening to this old woman's story tonight. Comment your name and where you're watching from and check if you're subscribed. It helps me share these real stories with more people like you. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I love knowing how far these true stories of survival and justice actually travel. How did I get here? You're wondering, standing in designer shoes I bought with money they think I don't have, about to ruin their perfect evening. Let me take you back to 6 months ago when everything I thought I knew about my family shattered, like that champagne flute I'm gripping. It started on a Tuesday morning, ordinary and unremarkable, when Marcos, my eldest, showed up at my small rental apartment unannounced for once. He hadn't visited in 3 years, too busy with his executive life. But there he was with Jennifer, his wife, both wearing expensive concern. They sat on my worn couch, the one Edie had since their father died, and told me about an investment opportunity that could change everything. Marcus handed me papers, thick expensive papers with official seals, talking fast about offshore accounts and tax shelters and compound interest. Jennifer touched my hand with her manicured fingers, her diamond bracelet catching the light, telling me this was my chance for financial security. I remember thinking how strange it was that they suddenly cared about my finances when they'd ignored my struggles for years without hesitation. But they were my children. I wanted to believe they finally saw me, finally wanted to help their mother who'd sacrificed everything for them. I signed the papers they pushed across my coffee table, trusting like the fool they believed me to be, like the naive old woman they needed. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly imagine, was that those papers transferred my lottery winnings into accounts I'd never see. Yes, lottery winnings, $18 million I'd won 3 months earlier and told only them about, trusting they'd help me manage it safely. I'd been so excited, calling each of them with tears in my voice, finally able to help with college funds and mortgage payments and vacations. They had all reacted perfectly. Congratulations and excitement, and promises to help me invest wisely, protect me from scammers who prey on lottery winners. The first hint something was wrong came 2 weeks after signing, when I tried to access the account Marcus set up and found it didn't exist. I called the bank 3 times, each representative telling me there was no account under my name, no record of any deposits or transactions anywhere. My stomach twisted into knots I couldn't untangle. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't name it. couldn't believe what my gut was screaming loudly. I called Marcus, and he sighed that patient sigh he used when I didn't understand technology, told me I must have written down wrong information. He'd check on it, he promised. Said not to worry, my pretty little head. Said these things take time when dealing with large sums and offshore. 2 more weeks passed with excuses that sounded reasonable on the surface, but left me hollow, checking my mailbox obsessively, for statements never came. That's when I found myself at a family dinner at Rebecca's house. My daughter, who'd always been the sweetest, the one who still called sometimes. I arrived early, let myself in with the key she'd given me years ago, heard voices coming from the kitchen where they didn't know I could hear. I stood frozen in the hallway, my coat still on, as Jennifer's voice cut through the air sharp as knives, dripping with contempt and satisfaction. She was laughing, actually laughing, telling Rebecca how easy it was to convince the stupid old bat to sign over every penny without reading. Marcus joined in, his voice the one that used to read me bedtime stories, now mocking how pathetically eager it'd been to trust them with everything. Rebecca, my sweet Rebecca, said something he'll never forget as long as I live, words that burned themselves into my brain like acid on metal. She said, Mom's always been gullible. Remember how she believed Dad loved her even when he was cheating? She sees what she wants to see. They laughed together, my 3 children and their spouses, united in their contempt for the woman who'd raised them, fed them, loved them always. The world didn't explode or shatter dramatically in that moment. It simply tilted slightly off axis, reality rearranging itself into something else. I backed out silently, left without being seen, drove home in a daze with their laughter echoing in my skull like a soundtrack to my destruction. That night, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't do anything but stare at the ceiling, wondering how it had been so blind for so long and always. The pain wasn't sharp and sudden like a knife wound. It was deep and spreading like poison, seeping into every memory and recoloring it with betrayal. Every birthday they'd missed, every call they'd ignored, every time they'd made me feel like a burden. Suddenly it all made a sick kind of sense. I thought they were just busy, distracted by their important lives. But the truth was simpler and more devastating. They just didn't care at all. Now let me bring you back to this moment. Standing in Marcus' foyer with my champagne glass and a room full of people who are about to witness. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I need to tell you what happened in those months between discovering their betrayal and this moment of justice. For 3 days after overhearing that conversation, I stayed in my apartment, curtains drawn, phone unplugged, trying to accept what they'd done. The weight of their betrayal sat on my chest like a boulder, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to imagine a future beyond this pain. I'd lie in bed replaying every interaction, every phone call, every visit, searching for signs I'd missed, clues I should have seen coming clearly. The woman I saw in the mirror looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed and defeated, someone who'd been playing a role her whole life without realizing. I'd been the good mother, the accommodating mother, the mother who never complained or demanded or made waves, and this was my reward for it all. But on the 4th morning, something shifted deep inside me. Some long dormant part of my soul that had been sleeping for decades suddenly woke up. I was standing in my tiny kitchen, making coffee, when I caught my reflection in the window and thought, no, this isn't how my story ends like this. They took my money, fine. They stole my trust, okay, but they didn't get to take my dignity and my self-respect. Those were still mine to keep. I started making calls, quiet calls to banks and the lawyers and legal aid offices, asking questions I should have asked before signing anything at all. Most people brushed me off, told me it was a family matter, suggested I was confused or mistaken, that surely my children wouldn't do such a thing. But I kept calling, kept explaining, kept insisting until finally someone listened, a legal aid lawyer named Sarah Chen, who agreed to meet me downtown. We met at a small coffee shop on a Thursday afternoon, me with my folder of papers, her with a notepad and a face that didn't show pity or doubt. Sarah listened to my entire story without interrupting, taking notes in neat handwriting, asking clarifying questions that showed she believed me completely. She told me what I'd already suspected deep down, that he had been defrauded by my own family, that the papers I signed transferred everything away. But then she said something that changed everything, that gave me the first real hope I'd felt in weeks since discovering the truth about them. She said, "Eleanor, elder fraud is a serious crime, and if we can prove what they did, they won't just lose the money. They'll face prison time." The word prison echoed in my mind, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not joy exactly, but a grim satisfaction that justice might exist. Sarah spent 3 weeks digging through records, making calls, following paper trails, uncovering the elaborate scheme my children had constructed so carefully. What she discovered was worse than Needy imagined. More calculated, more cruel, more proof that this wasn't impulsive greed, but planned destruction of me. They hadn't just taken my lottery money. They'd been planning this for months, setting up fake companies and offshore accounts long before I won anything. Marcus had access to my mail through a key ID given him for emergencies. Had seen the lottery commission's letter before I did it, called his siblings. They'd met multiple times to plan the theft. Sarah found emails and text messages discussing strategies, dividing up percentages, celebrating their cleverness. The account they created in my name was real enough to show me bank statements, but the signature cards redirected everything to accounts they controlled. They divided it up already by the time they convinced me I'd been scammed, bought vacation homes and new cars, and paid off crushing debts quickly. Sarah showed me bank statements she'd subpoenaed through legal channels, paper trails that proved every word of what I'd overheard was true and worse. Marcus bought a boat, a 30-foot yacht he'd always wanted, paid cash from an account fed directly by my lottery winnings, stolen from me completely. Rebecca used her share to pay off her mortgage and buy a new BMW. The one she'd posted all over social media without mentioning where money came from. Jennifer, always the most materialistic, went on a shopping spree that would make most people sick, designer clothes and jewelry and handbags adding up. My youngest, Christopher, and his wife Amanda had received the smallest share, and Sarah thought maybe they'd been less involved in the planning somehow. But the worst part, the detail that made me physically sick when Sarah showed me, was the group text chain she'd obtained through legal discovery methods. They joked about my reaction when I figured it out, placing bets on how long it would take the old lady to realize she'd been completely robbed. Jennifer had written, "Give her a few months, then we'll tell her she got scammed by internet fraudsters. She'll believe it and blame herself surely." Marcus responded, "Mom's always been easy to manipulate. Remember when we convinced her dad's affair was their foul? She apologized to him for it," Rebecca added. "I almost feel bad, but she's got her Social Security, and that's more than she needs. We have families to support and futures to secure." Reading those messages felt like being stabbed repeatedly, each word a fresh wound, each joke at my expense a reminder of how little I mattered to them. The casual cruelty was somehow worse than the theft itself. The ease with which they dismissed my humanity reduced me to an obstacle and a resource. I sat in Sarah's office, crying for the first time since discovering the truth. Not sad tears, but angry tears. Tears that burned with a rage, decades old. Sarah handed me tissues and waited patiently, then said something that would become my mantra for the next several months of planning and preparation. She said, "Eleanor, the best revenge isn't getting angry, it's getting even. And we're going to make sure they pay for every penny and every lie told." We spent the next 2 months building an airtight case, gathering evidence, taking depositions, preparing for both criminal charges and civil lawsuits together. Sarah introduced me to a detective who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly, a woman named Margaret Torres who'd seen cases like mine. Detective Torres was tough and no-nonsense, but I could see the anger in her eyes when she read through the evidence, the personal offense she took. She told me these cases were more common than people realized, that families stealing from elderly relatives was an epidemic hidden behind closed doors always. She promised me she'd do everything in her power to make sure my children faced consequences, not just financial, but criminal, public, devastating for them. Meanwhile, I had to keep up the act. Had to pretend I believed their story about being scammed. Had to play the foolish old woman they thought I was. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Harder than any physical labor. Harder than raising 3 kids alone after my husband died. Harder than anything. I had to answer their phone calls with confusion in my voice, accept their fake sympathy, thank them for checking on me while knowing exactly what they'd done. I had to attend family dinners and smile at their faces across the table, watch them spend my money on expensive wine and imported cheese and fresh flowers. I had to listen to Jennifer complain about how hard it was to find good help these days, all while wearing earrings that cost more than my monthly rent. I had to watch Marcus show off photos of his new boat, inviting everyone to come sailing, never once mentioning where he got the money to buy it. I had to hear Rebecca talk about her home renovations, the new kitchen and master bathroom, the landscaping that cost as much as a car, paid with my cash. Every interaction was torture. Every fake smile they gave me felt like acid on my skin. Every word of concern from their lying mouths made me want to scream. But I didn't scream. I didn't break. I didn't give them any hint that I knew the truth, because I had a plan and I needed them unsuspecting and comfortable. Sarah had suggested that the best time to expose them would be at a public event, somewhere with witnesses, somewhere they couldn't run or hide or deny. Marcus's 15th wedding anniversary party was perfect, a lavish event he'd been planning for months, inviting everyone who mattered in their social circle. He'd invited me too, probably out of obligation, maybe to rub salt in the wound, to parade his success bought with stolen money in front of my face. I accepted the invitation graciously, told him I wouldn't miss it for the world. Let him think I was just a grateful mother, happy to celebrate them. In the weeks leading up to the party, Sarah's Detective Torre and I coordinated every detail of what would happen, leaving nothing to chance at all. Sarah prepared folders of evidence for key guests, people who needed to see the truth, business partners and social connections who'd turn on them fast. Detective Torres arranged for plainclothes officers to attend, ready to make arrests if necessary, to prevent anyone from fleeing once the truth came out. I contacted an investigative journalist named Patricia Ward who'd been writing about elder abuse, offered her the exclusive story of a lifetime completely. Patricia jumped at it, agreeing to pose as a caterer at the party, camera hidden, ready to document everything for the explosive article she'd write. I also did something they didn't expect. Something that gave me back power they didn't know I had. I'd recovered a portion of my money through legal means. Sarah had found a loophole, a way to freeze accounts and recover assets before the criminal trial, enough to prove I wasn't the helpless victim anymore. I used some of that recovered money to buy myself new clothes, get my hair done professionally, look like someone who belonged at their fancy party. When I looked at myself in the mirror the night of the party, I barely recognized the woman staring back. confident, strong, dangerous, with truth. I'd spent 72 years making myself smaller, quieter, less threatening, and tonight I was going to take up all the space I denied myself always. I arrived at Marcus' house in a car service, not asking them for a ride, not giving them any control over my transportation or my timing or my exit. The house was stunning, all marble and glass and expensive taste, every detail perfect, every surface gleaming, bought with my stolen lottery winnings entirely. Guests were already arriving, the wealthy and influential of our town, the people Marcus and Jennifer had been trying to impress for years without success. They'd finally cracked that exclusive social circle, and it only cost them their mother's life savings and their basic human decency to get inside it. Marcus greeted me at the door with his public smile, the one he used for people he needed to impress, not the real warmth he'd shown me as a child. Jennifer kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and overwhelming, her dress probably costing more than I'd spent on clothes in the last 5 years combined. They led me into the party like a prop, the doting mother who proved they were good people, family-oriented, respectful of their elders and traditions. Rebecca was already there with her husband Tom, both looking elegant and successful. The picture of a perfect upper-middle-class couple living the dream. Christopher and Amanda stood near the bar looking slightly uncomfortable, and I felt a flicker of hope that maybe they weren't completely lost to greed yet. The party was everything they'd hoped for, elegant and expensive. A celebration of 15 years of marriage built on lies and stolen money and betrayal. I accepted a glass of champagne from a server, my hand steady despite my racing heart, my mind calm despite the chaos about to unfold so soon. I made small talk with the guests, played the role of the proud mother, let them think I was just another elderly woman grateful to be included in festivities. All the while, I was watching, observing, taking in every detail, waiting for the perfect moment when everyone was gathered and paying attention fully. Sarah had positioned herself near the door, dressed elegantly, looking like just another guest, but I knew she was ready with the evidence and legal papers. Patricia was circulating with the trays of appetizers, her camera hidden but recording, capturing the party in all its excessive glory before it all fell apart. The plainclothes officers were easy to spot if you knew what to look for, but nobody was looking. Everyone was too busy being impressed by Marcus. Marcus clinked his glass for attention around 8:30. The party in full swing. Everyone relaxed with alcohol and good food and expensive entertainment. He gave a speech about Jennifer, about their 15 years together, about building a life and the future, about family being everything that truly mattered. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. This man talking about family values while having robbed his own mother blind for financial gain without conscience. Jennifer dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, playing the emotional wife perfectly, her performance worthy of an award for sustained deception and cruelty. When Marcus finished his speech, I knew it was time. This was the moment we'd planned, the perfect opening for the truth to finally be spoken out loud. I raised my hand slightly, catching Marcus' attention, and asked if I could say a few words about my son and his beautiful wife and their wonderful life. Marcus looked surprised but pleased, probably thinking I'd give some sentimental mother's tribute, another prop to prove what a wonderful son he was to me. He gestured for me to come forward, and I walked to the center of the room, feeling every eye on me, feeling my power for the first time in years. This was it, the moment I'd been planning for months, the moment when I stopped being invisible and became the storm that would destroy their perfect world. I took a breath, my heart pounding, but my hands suddenly steady, and I tapped my champagne glass with my grandmother's silver spoon To ensure silence, the room gradually quieted, faces turning toward me with a polite curiosity, mixed with surprise that boring old Eleanor was demanding attention for once in life. Marcus looked alarmed, starting to move toward me, but I spoke before he could reach me, my voice carrying clearly through the enormous room surprisingly. I began by thanking everyone for their coming to celebrate Marcus and Jennifer's anniversary, their beautiful life together, their impressive success and obvious happiness. I talked about how proud I am as a mother to see my children thriving, living in beautiful homes, driving expensive cars, taking luxury vacations constantly. The guests smiled and nodded, some raising their glasses, thinking this was just a sentimental mother's tribute at her son's party. Nothing unusual yet. Then I paused, let the silence stretch just long enough to make people slightly uncomfortable, and said, I'd like to share how they achieved all this. Marcus' face drained of color faster than water down a drain. Jennifer's smile froze into something brittle and false. Rebecca took a step backward. I continued, my voice steady and clear, explaining that 6 months ago, I won $18 million in the state lottery, a life-changing amount of money. I trusted my children to help me manage it wisely, to protect me from scammers, to help me invest it safely for my future and theirs and grandchildren. Gasps rippled through the crowd, guests exchanging glances, some already pulling out phones, the story getting interesting in ways they hadn't anticipated at all. Instead of helping me, I told them my children created fake investment accounts, forged documents, and systematically stole every single penny from their mother. I described finding the group text messages where they joked about my stupidity, planned how to gaslight me into thinking I'd been scammed by strangers. I described how they divided up my money like pirates splitting treasure, how they bought boats and cars and homes while I believed they lost everything. Jennifer was shaking her head frantically, trying to interrupt, but I kept talking, my voice rising slightly. Decades of being silenced, now erupting clearly. I pulled out the folder Sarah had prepared, held it up so everyone could see, explained that it contained bank statements, text messages, forged signatures. I described how Marcus mortgaged his boat with my money, how Rebecca paid off her mortgage with my money, how Jennifer's jewelry was mine, all mine, completely. The room was dead silent now. Every eye on me, phones recording, Patricia's camera rolling from her position near the wall, capturing every second forever. Marcus finally found his voice, tried to say something about misunderstandings and confusion, that I was elderly and confused, and this was a terrible mistake. But I was ready for this. I've been ready for months, and I turned to the crowd and asked if anyone would like to see the evidence for themselves. Sarah Chen stepped forward from where she'd been waiting by the door, introduced herself as my attorney, and began distributing copies of key documents quickly. The police officers revealed themselves, moving to block the exits, explaining calmly that they had warrants for Marcus, Jennifer, and Rebecca's arrest now. The change in the room was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. Marcus's business partners backing away, Rebecca crying, Jennifer frantically calling someone. Christopher and Amanda looked genuinely shocked, and I realized they weren't part of the planning. They didn't know, which gave me strange small comfort somehow. I watched it all unfold like a movie. I was both starring in and observing from a distance. My heart calm now, the justice finally arriving after months. Marcus tried to approach me, his face contorted with anger and desperation, hissing that I was ruining everything, destroying the family. How could I do this? I looked him in the eyes, this man I raised and loved and sacrificed for, and told him quietly that he destroyed our family when he decided to steal. I reminded him that I'd given him everything, my time, my energy, my money when his father died, my unconditional love, even when he forgot I existed. I told him that all he'd ever wanted was respect, basic human decency, to be treated like a person instead of an inconvenience or a resource to exploit. He had nothing to say to that, no defense, no explanation, just the dawning realization that his mother wasn't the weak old woman he'd thought I was. The police led them away in handcuffs. A perp walked through their own anniversary party. Past guests who were already texting and calling and spreading news. Patricia got it all on camera. Every moment of their humiliation. The story that would run on the front page tomorrow and go viral by the afternoon, guaranteed. Some guests left immediately, embarrassed or uncomfortable, but others stayed, approaching me with sympathy or curiosity or shocked admiration for what I had done. I stood there, surrounded by strangers who suddenly saw me as a person, as someone with agency and power, not just a prop in someone else's story anymore. Sarah came over and squeezed my hand, told me I'd done incredibly well, that the evidence was solid and the charges would stick without question at all. Patricia asked if she could interview me for her article, and I agreed, knowing that telling my story publicly might help other elderly people in similar situations. I left the party before it officially ended, walked out into the cool night air feeling lighter than I had in months, maybe years, maybe my entire life. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted. Criminal charges filed, civil suits launched, their reputations destroyed in the court of public opinion. The story went viral just as Patricia predicted, my face and theirs on news websites and social media, becoming a cautionary tale about greed and elder abuse. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, some with apologies for not seeing what was happening, others with their own stories of family betrayal. I discovered I wasn't alone, that elder abuse was shockingly common, that families stealing from elderly relatives was an epidemic hidden behind closed doors. Marcus lost his executive position within a week when his company learned about the fraud charges, his carefully built career crumbling like a house of cards. His business partners cut ties immediately, not wanting to be associated with someone facing felony charges for defrauding his own elderly mother so cruelly. The country club revoked his membership. The charitable boards removed his name. The social circle he'd worked so hard to join rejected him completely now. Rebecca's husband Tom filed for divorce within 2 weeks, unwilling to be associated with someone facing felony charges, taking their kids and most assets. Her friends stopped calling, her social invitations dried up. The life she had built on stolen money and false pretenses collapsed around her in rubble and shame. Jennifer's family, old money types who valued reputation above everything else, disowned her publicly in the newspaper, cutting her off from trust funds. The social circle they'd worked so hard to infiltrate rejected them completely, invitations drying up, phone calls going unanswered, doors literally closing always. I watched it all from a distance, not with sadistic joy exactly, but with a sense of rightness, of balance being restored to a universe they'd thrown off. I didn't take pleasure in their suffering the way they took pleasure in mine, but I wouldn't pretend I felt guilty for holding them accountable for crimes. The trial preparations took months, during which I had to relive every moment of betrayal, every lie, every mocking text message read aloud in courtrooms. Sarah prepared me thoroughly, told me what to expect, reminded me constantly that I was the victim here, that I'd done nothing wrong or shameful at all. The prosecution was aggressive, painting my children as predators who targeted their own vulnerable elderly mother for financial gain without conscience ever. The defense tried to paint me as confused, as vindictive, as someone who'd given them the money willingly and then changed her mind out of spite. But the evidence was overwhelming, the paper trail clear, the text messages damning in their casual cruelty and calculated planning of the theft entirely. I testified for 6 hours over 2 days, telling my story calmly and clearly, refusing to cry or break down, maintaining the dignity they tried to steal. I described my relationship with my children before the lottery, how they gradually distanced themselves, how it became invisible in their busy, important lives. I described the excitement of winning, the joy I felt imagining helping them, paying for college educations and dream vacations, and financial security always. I described how they'd manipulated that love and trust, how they'd used my natural desire to help against me, weaponized my maternal instincts completely. I described overhearing their conversation at Rebecca's house, the moment when I realized they didn't just not love me, they actively despised me deeply. I described the months of investigation, of gathering evidence, of playing along with their gaslighting while planning justice with Sarah and Detective Torres. When I finished testifying, the courtroom was silent. Several jurors were crying. The judge looked at my children with barely concealed disgust on her face. The defense attorneys had nothing, no real argument, no way to explain away the text messages and bank statements and recorded conversations between them. Marcus took the stand and tried to claim it given them permission, that he had been confused about the arrangements, that this was a misunderstanding only. But the prosecution destroyed him on cross-examination, showing how his story contradicted the physical evidence, how his lies piled up contradicting each other. Jennifer refused to testify, probably on her lawyer's advice, knowing anything she said would only make things worse given what was already in evidence. Rebecca cried through her testimony, claimed she'd only gone along with Marco's plan because she was desperate, buried in debt, trying to save her marriage. But the prosecution showed texts where she had actively participated in planning it, where she had joked about my gullibility, where she had celebrated stealing my money. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict on all counts: fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, theft, forgery. The judge's face stern as she read verdicts. Marcus got 6 years in federal prison, Jennifer 5 years, Rebecca 4 years. Sentences that some people thought harsh, but I thought were almost too lenient. They'd stolen more than money. They'd stolen my peace, my trust, my sense of safety in the world, my belief that family meant something sacred and real. 6 years in prison seemed like a small price to pay for destroying a mother's faith in her own children, for making me question everything I'd believed. But the criminal convictions were only part of the justice. The civil suits recovered most of my money, about $12 million after legal fees and restitution. The houses they bought were sold, the cars repossessed, the jewelry and artwork and luxury items auctioned off to pay back what they'd stolen from me. I recovered enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, to help the grandchildren who eventually came around, to donate to causes I believed in. But more than the money, I recovered something I'd lost long before the lottery: my sense of self-worth, my voice, my refusal to be invisible anymore. Christopher and Amanda came to see me after the trial, crying and apologizing for not seeing what was happening, for not protecting me when I needed it. They showed me that they'd received some money from Marcus, but had kept it in a separate account, never spent it, felt wrong about it even then. They returned every penny without me asking, said they wanted nothing that came from hurting me, that they were ashamed they hadn't questioned things sooner. I forgave them because I could see their remorse was genuine, because they were willing to face what their siblings had done and choose differently now. We're rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, with honesty and boundaries, with open communication instead of the toxic patterns of my earlier family dynamic. The grandchildren were harder, Some were angry at me for putting their parents in prison, unable to understand the full scope of what had been done. I didn't force anything. Just let them know I was here when they were ready, that I'd answered questions honestly when they wanted to hear the truth. Some have come around over the months, curious about the grandmother they barely knew, wanting to understand how it all went so wrong in their family. I tell them everything, the good and the bad and the complicated, because they deserve honesty even when it's uncomfortable and difficult to process fully. I tell them about their parents as children, the good times we had, the love I felt, how proud I was of them before money and greed destroyed everything. I tell them about the gradual distancing, the ways I made excuses for being ignored, how I convinced myself that being dismissed was normal and acceptable. I tell them about the lottery win, my excitement, my desire to help, my naive trust that my children would protect me instead of preying on me. I tell them about the betrayal, the theft, the mocking laughter, the gaslighting, the realization that I meant nothing to the people who meant everything to me. And I tell them about the choice I made, to fight back, to demand justice, to refuse to be a victim, even when staying silent would have been easier. Some of them understand, some don't, and that's okay. They need time to process, to reconcile the parents they knew with the criminals they became. I've learned it through all this that love without respect is just another form of use, that family means nothing if not backed by care and decency always. I've learned it that being quiet and accommodating doesn't make you noble. Sometimes it just makes you a target for people who mistake kindness for weakness. I've learned that it's never too late to find your voice, to stand up for yourself, to refuse to be treated as less than human by anyone ever. I've learned that real strength isn't in accepting abuse silently. It's in having the courage to say no, to fight back, to demand better treatment always. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting continued harm, that you can forgive someone and still hold them accountable for their actions completely. I live simply now in a nice apartment in a different part of town, away from the memories and the pain, starting fresh at 72 years old. The apartment isn't the mansion I could afford with my recovered money, but it's mine, chosen by me, decorated to my taste, filled with my peace. I have plants on the windowsill that I water every morning, books I read without interruption, coffee I drink slowly while watching the sunrise over the city. I volunteer at a legal aid clinic 3 days a week, helping other elderly people who've been scammed or abused, using my story to help them feel less alone. There's a community of us, it turns out, older people who've been dismissed and robbed and gaslit by those who were supposed to protect us from harm. We meet monthly at the community center, share our stories, offer support and advice, remind each other that we have value regardless of what anyone has said. Some of us fought back like I did. Some are still fighting. Some chose different paths. But we all understand the unique pain of family betrayal intimately. I've become friends with Sarah, who's no longer just my lawyer, but someone I have coffee with, someone who saw me as strong when I felt broken. I'm happy now in a way I wasn't even before all this happened, because I'm finally living for myself instead of making myself smoke-a-lair for others. I make decisions based on what I want, not what others expect. I spend my time doing things that bring me joy instead of serving others constantly. I've taken up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. And I'm terrible at it, but I don't care at all. Nobody's judging my crooked trees or my muddy sunsets. Nobody's telling me I'm wasting time and that freedom is worth more than any perfect painting. I travel when I want, nothing extravagant, just weekend trips to nearby towns. visiting museums and gardens and bookstores at my own pace without rushing. I eat dinner when I'm hungry, not at designated times. I wear comfortable clothes that nobody else has to approve. I live by my own rules finally. The money sits in properly managed accounts now, handled by professionals with no family connection, no reason to steal from an old woman who trusted them. I've set up trust funds for the grandchildren who've chosen to maintain relationships with me, money they'll get for college and starting their lives right. I donate regularly to organizations that help elderly people, that fight elder abuse, that provide legal services to vulnerable populations who can't afford lawyers. Every month I write a check to the legal aid office where Sarah still works, ensuring other Eleanor Mitchells can get the help they desperately need now. I'm not rich anymore, not $18 million rich, but I have enough, more than enough. And I learned that enough is actually a beautiful thing. The question I asked myself for months after the trial was whether I could have prevented this with different choices made earlier in my life, honestly. If I'd been less trusting, less accommodating, less desperate for their approval, would they have still targeted me or respected me more instead of this? If I'd maintained stronger boundaries when they were young, if they'd demanded respect instead of accepting scraps, would things have turned out differently for us? If he'd been a different kind of mother, less self-sacrificing, more assertive, would they have grown into different kinds of people who valued me as a human? You'll never know the answers to those questions, and I've learned that in dwelling on what-ifs only steals today's peace to mourn yesterday's pain pointlessly forever. What I do know is that I gave them every chance to be better people, to choose love over greed, to value their mother over money and social status. I gave them opportunities to come clean, to make amends, to choose honesty at multiple points before I exposed them publicly at that anniversary party. Even after I knew the truth, I gave them months where I would have forgiven them if they just admitted what they'd done and shown genuine remorse. They made their choices, and then I made mine, and the consequences they're living with now are entirely of their own creation, not my responsibility anymore. Sometimes I wonder if they regret it, if they lie awake in their prison cells thinking about the mother they betrayed for money they don't have now. I wonder if they understand what they threw away, if they comprehend that you can't buy back a relationship you murdered for temporary financial gain ever. I wonder if Jennifer misses her designer clothes and jewelry more than she regrets losing her mother-in-law, who actually cared about her once upon a time. I wonder if Marcus thinks about his boat while sitting in a cell, if he considers whether that yacht was worth 6 years of his life and his reputation. I wonder if Rebecca has realized that the mortgage she paid off with my money is now gone, the house sold, everything she bought with theft repossessed, but mostly I don't think about them at all anymore, which is perhaps the greatest victory of all, that they no longer occupy the center of my world. They are just people I used to know, people who made terrible choices, people who are facing consequences while I am living my life in peace and freedom. I think about the life I'm building, the people I'm helping, the peace I found in knowing my worth, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes it. I think about the morning light through my kitchen window and the coffee I drink slowly without rushing, about books I read without interruption constantly. I think about the watercolor paintings I create that nobody sees but me, the small joys of creating something just for the pleasure of creation itself. I think about the other survivors I meet at the support group, how we laugh together now despite the pain we've endured, how we've reclaimed our voices. I think about Sarah stopping by for coffee, about the honest friendship we built, about having someone who sees me as strong instead of weak and helpless. I think about the grandchildren who come to visit, slowly building relationships based on honesty instead of the lies their parents constructed around everything. There's Michael, Marcus's oldest, who's 20 now and comes by every other week to talk about college and life and the complicated feelings he has. He's angry at his father, but also grieving the family he thought he had. And I let him process without pushing, just offering space and understanding. There is Emma, Rebecca's daughter, 16, and full of questions about what really happened, wanting to understand before she decides how to feel about it. I tell her everything honestly, show her the evidence when she asks. Let her see that her mother's actions were wrong even if her love for her mother isn't. Christopher's kids visit most often since their parents maintained a relationship with me, and in building the kind of grandmother bond I always wanted with them. They're learning that you can love someone and still hold them accountable. That family means honesty and respect, not blind loyalty to people who harm you. I'm teaching them by example that being old doesn't mean being powerless, that you can demand dignity at any age, that your voice matters always no matter what. The local news did a follow-up story 6 months after the trial, checking in on how I was doing, whether I felt justice had been served appropriately. I told the reporter honestly that justice is complicated, that no sentence could undo the betrayal, but accountability mattered more than revenge ever did. I told her that I hoped my story would encourage other elderly people to speak up, to fight back, to know they deserved better treatment from everyone. The story generated hundreds of responses, emails, and letters from people across the country sharing their own experiences with elder abuse and family theft. Some were still in the middle of it, asking for advice, and I connected them with Sarah and organizations that could help them fight back legally. Some had stayed silent for years, and my story gave them courage to finally report what had happened to them, to stop protecting people who hurt them. Some just wanted to say thank you, to tell me that seeing an elderly woman fight back and win gave them hope that the justice was possible for them. Those messages meant more to me than any amount of money, knowing that my pain might prevent someone else's, that my voice might help others find theirs. I've been asked to speak at conferences about elder abuse, to share my story with social workers and lawyers and law enforcement who handle these cases. It's strange standing in front of rooms full of people, me who spent decades trying to be invisible, now deliberately taking up space and demanding attention. But I do it because it matters, because every person I reach might help another Eleanor somewhere, might recognize the signs and intervene sooner. I talk about the red flags I missed, the gradual isolation, the way they made me doubt myself, the financial manipulation that started small and grew. I talk about the importance of maintaining independence, of having your own bank accounts, of not signing things without reading them carefully, no matter who asks. I talk about trusting your instincts, about knowing that if something feels wrong, it probably is, about not making excuses for people who dismiss your concerns. Most importantly, I talk about the fact that it's never too late to fight back, that being elderly doesn't mean being powerless or voiceless or without options. The anniversary of the trial was last month. 1 year since my children were convicted and sentenced. 1 year since justice was officially served in court. I didn't celebrate exactly, but I did acknowledge it, took myself to a nice restaurant, toasted to survival and strength and the future in building alone. Sarah joined me, and we talked about how far it had come, from the broken woman in her office a year and a half ago to the person I am now sitting here. She told me she was proud of me, that I'd been one of the strongest clients she'd ever represented, that my courage had inspired her own work. I told her that she'd saved my life in a very real way, that without her believing me, I might have just accepted their lies and faded away into nothing. We cried a little, laughed a lot, and made plans for the future, for the advocacy work we'd continue doing together, for the lives we'd help change. I sometimes think about what my life would look like if I'd never won that lottery, if this whole nightmare had never happened to me and my children. Would we have continued the slow drift apart, me getting smaller and quieter, them getting busier and more distant until I died alone and forgotten eventually? Would I have spent my final years grateful for scraps of attention, making excuses for their neglect, blaming myself for not being worth their time or effort? In a twisted way, winning that lottery and having it stolen was the best thing that could have happened because it forced the truth into the open finally. It revealed who they really were, not who I wanted them to be, and gave me the chance to stop living a lie and start living authentically at last. If I died believing their lies, believing they loved me, I would have died as a ghost, a shadow, someone who never really existed as a full person. Now I'm more alive than I've ever been, more myself than I ever allowed myself to be, and that's worth more than $18 million could ever buy. The money they stole was significant, but what they accidentally gave me in return was invaluable. My voice, my power, my sense of self-worth and agency. They meant to destroy me completely, to take everything and leave me with nothing. But they underestimated the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. When you hit bottom, when you've lost everything you thought defined you, you find out what you're really made of, what can be stolen or destroyed ever. I discovered that I'm made of stronger stuff than I knew, that decades of being dismissed hadn't actually erased me, just covered me up temporarily like dust. I discovered that anger can be fuel instead of poison, that rage channeled into action becomes justice, that refusing to be a victim is a choice available always. I discovered that I'd spent my whole life waiting for permission to exist fully, permission that nobody was ever going to grant me, permission I had to give myself. And once I gave myself that permission, once I decided I mattered, that my pain mattered, that my dignity mattered, everything changed in fundamental ways. The world didn't change, people didn't change, my children certainly didn't change, but I changed, and that made all the difference in how I moved through life. I stopped asking for crumbs and started demanding full meals, stopped whispering and started speaking clearly, stopped apologizing for existing in space and time. I stopped being the supporting character in everyone else's story and became the protagonist of my own, even if that story included conflict and pain and loss. Because a painful, authentic life is better than a comfortable, false one, and I'd rather live 1 year as myself than 30 more years as someone else's convenience. The hardest part now isn't the loneliness. Though there are lonely moments, it's unlearning decades of conditioning that told me I didn't matter much at all. It's catching myself about to apologize for nothing, about to make myself smaller out of habit, and consciously choosing to stand tall instead of shrinking down. It's recognizing when I'm about to sacrifice my needs for someone else's wants and asking myself if that's actually necessary or just old patterns repeating. It's learning to say no without guilt, to prioritize myself without shame, to understand that self-care isn't selfish when you've spent decades being selfless always. Some days are easier than others. Some days I wake up feeling strong and certain. Other days the old doubts creep in like fog, obscuring everything clear. On those harder days, I look at the evidence folder Sarah gave me, not to relieve the pain, but to remind myself that my feelings were valid and real. I look at those text messages where they mocked me, and instead of feeling hurt, I feel grateful that I found them, that I know the truth now. I look at the bank statement showing the theft, And instead of feeling robbed, I feel proud that I fought back and won, that I refused to stay silent. I look at the court documents with their convictions, and instead of feeling guilty, I feel satisfied that the justice exists, that actions have consequences sometimes, and then I close the folder and put it away because I don't want to live in the past, even a past where I want to live in the present. The present where I'm having coffee with a friend who respects me, where I'm painting watercolors that make me happy, where I'm helping people who need it. The present where I wake up without dread, where I answer the phone without anxiety, where I look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back clearly. The present where I'm building a life based on my values, not others' expectations, where I'm allowed to change my mind, make mistakes, be imperfect openly. I'm 72 years old, and I'm finally learning who Eleanor Mitchell is when she's not busy being what everyone else needed her to be for them. I'm learning that I like quiet mornings and old jazz music, that I prefer small gatherings to big parties, that I have opinions about politics and books. I'm learning that I'm funnier than I thought, more capable than I believed, stronger than anyone, including myself, ever gave me credit for being before this. I'm learning that starting over at 72 isn't tragic, it's liberating, that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be all along. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey from that anniversary party to where I am now, thank you for listening to an old woman's story tonight. Thank you for witnessing my pain without dismissing it, for celebrating my victory without judging it, for understanding why I had to fight back so hard. I want to ask you something personal, something I genuinely want to know. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved deeply and trusted completely? Have you ever discovered that the people you thought were your foundation were actually undermining you, stealing from you, mocking you behind closed doors? Have you ever had to make the impossible choice between family loyalty and your own dignity, between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself honestly? Did you find the courage to fight back, or did you stay silent? And if you stayed silent, do you regret it, or did you find peace another way entirely? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have exposed them publicly or handled it differently? Would you have forgiven them or demanded justice? Do you think I went too far by putting my children in prison? Or do you think I should have done more, should have been harsher in my revenge? If you're facing something similar right now, trap it in abuse or betrayal by people who claim to love you, please know that you deserve so much better. You deserve respect and honesty and care, regardless of your age or situation or how long you've been accepting less than you deserve from people around you. It's not too late to find your voice, to get help, to refuse to be a victim anymore. I promise you with everything in me, it's not too late for justice. Reach out to legal aid, call elder abuse hotlines, tell someone who listen and believe you. Don't suffer in silence like I did for those terrible months. Your story matters, your pain is valid, your dignity is worth fighting for, and you don't have to face this alone because there are people who will help you. Thank you for listening to my story from beginning to end. Every word of it true. These are real experiences from real people who found the strength to survive. If this touched you or made you think or gave you courage to face your own difficulties, please subscribe to this channel to hear more stories like mine. I share these stories every week, true accounts of survival and justice, and people finding their power even when everything seemed hopeless and impossible to fix. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. If you think I went too far or not far enough in seeking justice for what they did, share your own story if you feel comfortable, Let others know they are not alone, that family betrayal is more common than people realize and not shameful. Have you lived through something similar with family or people you trusted completely? And if so, how did you handle it? What helped you heal and move forward? What advice would you give to someone going through elder abuse right now? Someone who's scared and alone and doesn't know where to turn for help tonight. Do you think forgiveness is possible in cases like mine? Or do you believe some betrayals are too deep, some wounds too severe to ever truly heal completely? Click the videos appearing on your screen. Now, for more true stories of people who refused to stay silent, who fought back, who reclaimed their dignity and power, stories of survival, of justice, of ordinary people finding extraordinary courage in the darkest moments, stories that might help someone who needs hope right now. Until the next story, remember that your voice matters regardless of age. Your pain is valid and deserves acknowledgement. Your dignity is worth fighting for always. Remember that being old doesn't mean being powerless, that you can demand respect at any age, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and win. Remember that family should mean love and respect, not abuse and exploitation, and you have every right to hold people accountable, even if they're blood relatives. And remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to stay silent, refuse to be invisible, refuse to accept being treated as less than human. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for listening to my pain and my triumph, for being witnesses to my story and hopefully carrying it forward. I'm Eleanor Mitchell. I'm 72 years old. I survived betrayal by my own children, and I'm here to tell you that surviving is just the beginning of living. The best part of life started after I stopped making myself small, after I stopped apologizing for existing, after I finally became visible on my own terms. And if an old woman like me can find her voice after 72 years of silence, then anyone can, at any age, in any situation, no matter how hopeless. Your story isn't over until you decide it's over, and you have the power to write a different ending, a better ending, an ending where you win finally. So write it, speak it, live it, and don't let anyone convince you that you don't matter, because you do. You absolutely do. And don't ever forget that truth.